Hey everyone, my name is Jordan. I'm the head coach here at SaberSim, and in this video, I wanted to talk about how you can start leveling up your MLB DFS process and take the next step with your baseball DFS lineups. But before we dive into that, first things first, it is really only once you make sure that you have the basics and the fundamentals down should you look to start adding to your process. Most DFS players overcomplicate their processes way too early without giving their more simplified process time to realize its profits. In the meantime, you should be taking the time to get the reps down and make sure you've mastered the basics. I've talked about some of those fundamentals in the previous videos in this series. If you haven't seen those videos and aren't sure exactly what the basics or fundamentals look like, go back and check those out here. But for those that are ready to take the next step, let's go ahead and dive right in. One of the best ways to start leveling up your process is to break down your lineups into separate builds based on the entry limit for the contests you're playing. If you watched our contest selection recommendations video, you're probably already playing a combination of single entry and 3 max contests along with some 20 max and 150 max contests. And at a fundamental level, building all of your lineups in one build is going to be the simplest way to build lineups here, and it's going to be the most efficient process as well. But you can squeeze out a little bit of additional value here, breaking up this into 2 different builds where you're doing your single entry and 3 max in one build here and using the settings for those kinds of contests, and then building all of your 20 max and 150 max contests in a separate build and using the settings for those contests here. There's a couple different advantages you get out of this here. The first one is that when you actually go and build these lineups and then use the Saber score to identify the best lineups from your pool, the Saber scores do change based on the contest size. Single entry and 3 maxes tend to be smaller than the larger field 20 max and 150 max contests, and ownership in particular is going to be a little bit less of a factor there. So ranking your lineups by exactly what you need to win the contests that you're entering them into is going to help out quite a bit. Second, you can take individualized or somewhat more individualized stands for certain contests. If you feel like a team is going to be used suboptimally or inefficiently under-owned as a stack in single entry contests, where ownership can be a little bit different, you can take that stand and enter those lineups only into your single entry and 3 max contests, where maybe in your 20 max and 150 max contests, you want to be a little bit more even with the field. Finally, you can also diversify your lineups a bit more appropriately here when you're breaking these up into separate builds. Really, we want to make sure our lineups are diversified amongst the lineups we're playing in similar contests. We really want to make sure that our single entry and 3 max in particular are diversified from each other, because those lineups are going to be entered typically into higher dollar contests. We're not as concerned about differentiating our most expensive single entry from all of the lineups we're playing in cheaper 150 maxes. We really want to make sure that they are diversified from the other single entry contests that we're playing on that slate. So breaking up your builds into the single entry and 3 max and a 20 max and 150 max build is a great way to start adding a little bit of additional value here. However, keep in mind, it's also going to take a little bit more time. You're going to be managing at least 2 builds and making adjustments to 2 different builds, and you'll also want to persist that through late swap. So this is why you want to make sure that you have the fundamentals down, you know how to execute your process quickly and efficiently. So if you scale up and start doing 2 times as many builds for each slate, you have the time and can get that done in time for lock. Another way to level up your game is with some advanced late swap strategies. And if you've mastered the fundamentals already, you probably know how important late swap is and how to get it done quickly and efficiently. However, there are ways to squeeze out a little bit of additional value here as well. Late swapping is important already to make sure you're getting zeros out of your lineups and to react to news, but in theory, you should also be late swapping your lineups to react to how they are performing in contests. Lineups that are underperforming can be late swapped so that you're late swapping into more volatile, higher upside, lower owned plays to get a little bit of min cash or just cash equity back into those lineups. And lineups that are overperforming and are already having a top 1% outcome from some other lower owned plays in the lineups might not need to be as risky with the remaining players in the lineup, and you might be able to late swap that lineup into safer plays to make sure you maintain that top 1% outcome as the slate plays out. In SaberSim, at the moment, this is a little bit tricky to do, and it does require some manual work. At a basic level, you can break up your late swap builds here based on how you're performing in contests overall, and swap your contests where you are exceeding expectations, specifically with specific 3 maxes or single entry contests, and swap those lineups into safer overall lineups later where you're valuing ownership a little bit less, or maybe swapping into some chalkier plays at pitcher or different things like that. If you're underperforming in a contest, you can do the opposite. Swap that lineup into more aggressive lineups here, get off the chalk, and maybe get onto some more contrarian stacks or fade some of the chalkier plays there. We want to do more in the app to make this a little bit easier in the future and make it easier to swap individual lineups based on how individual lineups are performing, but there is still a great way to do this right now here, where you are just breaking up your late swap builds and swapping different contests separately based on how they are performing. One of the best ways to level up your game in MLB DFS is to become an expert in baseball itself. Researching the slate by reading articles, watching videos, listening to podcasts from other experts is a great way to check SaberSim and add some additional value in your process. But one of the best ways to get better at MLB DFS is to do your own original research and become an expert yourself. Digging into this data is a great way to build a sense of intuition and have a stronger overall research process where you're going to the primary source of the data to make these decisions. However, we have a great model in Sim already that takes into account most of the info that we think is important and predictive to building great DFS lineups. So how do you actually go about doing this? Well, a couple things you can look into. First is, where are there situations that are inherently hard to project because the variance of that situation is higher than normal? This can be things like a recent injury that has changed the starting lineup of a team. It can be new players getting called up from the minors. It can be higher than normal variance weather with wind or precipitation or things like that. It can be new rules changes or park changes that are happening at the start of this particular season and tend to happen in the off season most years. These are all situations where we at SaberSim are going to do the best we can to model those based on what we think is likely to happen, but no model in these higher than normal variance situations is going to be perfect. So looking at the data yourself for those spots and making some adjustments can be a good way to become an expert in this sport. Another way to go about this is thinking about what biases do the models that you're working with have here. SaberSim itself is going to have some biases, and any other projection model is as well. There are going to be teams that we tend to like more than the field does consistently over and over again, and we're going to have teams that we dislike or players that we dislike over and over again. We do have a manual review process for our sims and models here to check some of this and bring us in line a little bit more to the field if we think that's appropriate, but studying what types of biases are present in the models you're working with and adjusting accordingly based on your own research is another way to start adding some additional value here. Another way to go about this is to look at what historically have teams done in situations like the games being played in that game have. What is the sample size of the data that is available for different players or the conditions of that game? And are the models you're using over or underreacting to recent short-term form for players or conditions in that game? You can ultimately use all of this research here together to not only adjust the exposures of the players and stacks you're getting in the lineups you're built from SaberSim, but to ultimately adjust the inputs to the build in the form of raw projections here by updating projections for players or maybe even building a projection model for yourself. Ultimately, this path in particular is really only going to be for the diehards. If you want to take your game as high as you can and have the time to do it, then you should become a true expert here in baseball overall. But for those looking to just make some extra cash on the side without having to quit your day job, you can stick with some of the other methods to level up your game, or again, just focus on the fundamentals we've outlined in our other videos. Once you've decided to take this step and start leveling up your game, it's time to consider SaberSim Pro. SaberSim Pro is going to make it easier to start incorporating some of this custom data and these custom workflows into your process, but it's not necessarily going to be right for everyone. If you're wondering if you should join SaberSim Pro, it really depends. First off, here's what everyone that joins Pro is going to benefit from. First, the ability to build 5,000 lineups at a time in a pool is huge. It's going to mean that your overall lineup quality is better just because we have more lineups to work from and rank using SaberScore, and it's going to make it much easier to diversify your lineups and take the stands you're looking for with your exposures and your stack exposures and things like that. If you're playing high volume or just want lower variance in the form of diversification, the 5,000 lineup pools could alone make it worth switching. Second, our prop plan that you have access to add on to the SaberSim Pro has been killing it all NBA season. We're up 45 units to this point in the year, and we're planning on rolling out props through that plan for baseball and then football in the fall as well. If you sign up for the prop plan, it alone can very easily pay for SaberSim Pro and the prop plan add-on. And finally, you get access to private content and a Discord community to help you through this process of leveling up your game. If you're still not sure after watching this video what becoming an expert looks like or how to do some of these things, these videos and the community discussions are a great place to start, and you can see what other sharp players are doing to add additional value to the SaberSim process. But the other features you get with SaberSim Pro aren't necessarily going to be for everybody. They let you upgrade and customize SaberSim with your own data and metrics. So if you want to do things like uploading important historical stats or creating your own custom lineup ranking metrics, then SaberSim Pro is probably for you. Overall, once we figure out improvements that we know add value and we can deliver into the app, we release them to everybody. This is things like SaberScore 2.0, which just came out a couple weeks ago, adjusted ownership, which is a new feature as well, and upside correlation. We are sure that there are more ways to continue to add value to SaberSim with custom data and advanced processes, but if we knew exactly what they were and could give you the blueprint to following them yourself, we would build them and release it to everybody. The custom features in SaberSim Pro are for advanced players that are already working with this kind of data. So if you are an expert in a particular sport or are becoming an expert in baseball and you know what data is going to be important to you to build great lineups, then SaberSim Pro is going to make it much easier to incorporate it into your process. Overall, I'm not going for the hard sell here. If you're playing reasonable volume and would benefit from a bigger lineup pool or just want lower variance, SaberSim Pro should pay for itself. But if you're on the fence, stick with standard, get comfortable with the fundamental process here, and if you decide to upgrade later, SaberSim Pro will still be there. Overall, the process of leveling up your MLB DFS game is about improving upon and iterating on the fundamentals. So you need to make sure that you have these fundamentals down first. Building and diversifying your lineups for specific contest types, late swapping based on individual lineup or contest performance, and becoming an expert or an originator of research are great places to start here. And throughout the MLB season, we'll be releasing more videos to our SaberSim Pro subscribers so you can see how some of our SaberSim Pros are leveling up their game and building great MLB DFS lineups. I hope this was a helpful video here for you, and good luck this MLB DFS season. If you have any questions, reach out in our Discord server or at support@sabersim.com. In the meantime, good luck and thanks.